Hey, Ollie,
Yes?
come here.
Yeah?
You say hello?
Hello. Nice to meet you. Shake hands.
Sally Phillips is a British mum with a vital message about Down syndrome, that it's not the scary, terrible disability it's made out to be. Sally's on a campaign to get mums and dads to think very, very carefully when the screening tests are positive for Downs.
Is it a reason to terminate? For me, personally, that's not a reason to terminate.
You must go home and give Oliver a hug and look at him and think, why wouldn't you want one of these?
Yeah. Well, I don't think of him as Down syndrome, really. He's my son, you know. He's my son.
Knock, knock. Who's there? Chicken.
Chicken who?
Buck, buck.
Sally's son, Ollie, is an exuberant, fun-loving boy who she says has improved her life beyond measure. But far fewer children like him are being brought into the world because new technology is screening them out. Now there's a simple blood test for Downs, the non-invasive prenatal test, or NIPT.
And what would you say to mums about to go into the system to have NIPT?
Because it's so easy to do, just be really aware that you're getting on a treadmill. So once you start having tests and getting results, you are on a conveyor belt towards the decision about whether or not to terminate. So I believe that women who feel that they're terminating for Down syndrome on medical grounds are being misled.
If Sally looks familiar, it's because she's one of Britain's most successful comedy actors. In TV series Miranda and Veep,
Madam Vice President.
Oh, Madam ex-Prime Minister of Finland.
to box office smashes like the Bridget Jones films,
God, I feel like my days of puppet shows are behind me.
where Sally plays Bridget's best friend, Shazza.
Finger puppets.
In real life, this is one smart woman, an Oxford graduate and a caring mum. Back in 2004, when Ollie was just 10 days old, she sensed there was something wrong. The doctor diagnosed the severe disability known as Down syndrome.
What was your immediate thought from what you knew about Down syndrome?
My first thought was, oh, Down syndrome we can manage. We can do that. And then it was my second, third and fourth thoughts that were a problem. That he's going to suffer and be in terrible pain, that my marriage is going to break up, that will I be able to work? I mean, you think all these things, you know. Didn't think I'd be able to work. I thought I'd just have to stay home with a dribbling baby.
So instantly it was more the disaster than the optimism.
Yeah, I didn't know any optimistic stories.
And here's Bartlett and Sarah. Let's turn around again.
The first ultrasound scan, usually at 10 to 12 weeks, is when couples first see their baby.
Nice little arms and legs. It's sort of in the fetal position, all curled up. There's a little hand trying to get its thumb into its mouth, I can tell already.
It's exciting, but it's also a bit nerve-wracking.
So much detail for something so small.
Because this is the day they'll also have the NIPT test for Down syndrome.
Your placenta is mostly...
Obstetrician Dr. Philippa Ramsey says that in most medical practices, but not all, the test is preceded by counselling.
If the test comes back positive, what do you say to the patient?
So we say that this is a high-risk result, high risk for Down syndrome, and then they have some options.
The most common option, in 9 out of 10 cases, when Down syndrome is confirmed, is abortion.
I'm not advocating termination of pregnancy, but that's what we're talking about because they're questioning about how would that happen, what would happen to me, when can that be done, how can it be done.
It's spoken about during pregnancy as the worst case scenario. It's in all the pregnancy manuals as one of the worst case scenarios.
That's because of the classification of severe disability.
Severe disability, yeah, and also because people don't know anyone with Down syndrome. I mean, they just don't know them.
Oh, you're kind of scary. Oh, my goodness. Go again.
In Sydney, 2-year-old Matteo,
Five.
his big sister Amelia, and their parents, Alana and Lovro, are the picture of a beautiful and loving family. But before Matteo was born, Alana and Lovro received the worst-case scenario speech from a genetic counsellor.
I immediately knew there was something wrong because normally they just let you go after your scan. And she said to me, I think I've got some bad news for you. It looks like you have a risk of having a child with Down syndrome. You really need to think about your options and what your next steps will be. Show them how do you kick the ball, go.
Despite the scans and the NIPT blood test all coming back positive, they decided to keep the baby.
A very brave decision. Is that how you saw it?
We knew that Down syndrome, needed some extra work, education and so on, but it wasn't necessarily deterrent. It wasn't a life-threatening condition.
It doesn't define him. It's only a part of him.
Go. No, kick it with your feet. Go.
Yeah, go.
At the moment, about 5 babies are born every week in Australia with Down syndrome. That's about 1 in every 1,100 births. It occurs at conception, and it's a kind of genetic spelling mistake. You see, people with Downs have 1 extra chromosome in their system. They have 47 compared to the normal 46. But the effects of that 1 extra chromosome can be totally variable. Some are quite mildly affected, others have a profound disability.
There is a range, and unfortunately none of the prenatal tests that we have available can tell us what the severity is going to be in a particular pregnancy.
There's no part of this test that says you're going to have a high-functioning Downs baby or it's going to be on the severe end.
That's right. If we had a test that could reassure parents that the Down syndrome baby is going to be high-functioning, like Sally's, or have a reasonably high IQ, or not have behavioural disorders, that would be really good if we could triage Down syndrome pregnancies like that.
In the absence of that knowledge, Sally Phillips believes couples get outdated, stereotypical information about Down syndrome kids, and they're not told that most thrive with their disability, and that leads to so many abortions.
Can you blame parents for being terrified at the prospect?
I'm not blaming. I hope I'm making that really clear. I'm blaming no one. I'm blaming no one. I just think you want to make the best decision based on truth. If you're going to take a decision to terminate a pregnancy, something that serious that's going to be with you forever, you're not going to do that lightly. And so you need to do it on correct facts, not out-of-date facts, as opposed to something dating from the 60s and 70s when kids weren't even allowed in school.
We received one printout, a photocopy, I think it was from 1987, about Down syndrome and what it means. We were told to think carefully about the implications of Down syndrome on our marriage, on our daughter. Do you know that he may not go to a mainstream school? But that's all completely false. He goes to a mainstream kindergarten and he has only enriched our family life.
So all the doctors were going down the track of termination?
Yes, whether explicitly or through innuendo.
I think that's just suboptimal. People should have good pre-test counselling, and when the result comes back, they should have good post-test counselling. It's obvious.
I like cleaning and dancing.
Yeah?
And Agnes over there.
Just before our interview with Sally, she interviewed Ollie for us at home on her phone. He was getting ready for school.
This is for people in Australia. What do you say to people in Australia?
Well done for your working in Australia.
Well done for working in Australia. They're very good at sport in Australia.
Yeah. I said well done for doing sports.
I see pictures of your son. He looks beautiful.
Yeah.
You just can tell he's a lovely boy, full stop.
Thank you. Yeah, and you like sport as well, don't you?
Yeah.
What sport do you like?
Cricket and football.
But Sally says because Ollie is on the milder side of the spectrum, she's been criticised for misrepresenting the severity of Down syndrome.
The more I looked at those criticisms, it felt like society was yelling, like the ableist narrative was kind of yelling, give us the people we know exist. So they wanted to be shown their picture of what Down syndrome was. So they wanted someone with a bad haircut, with an unwiped nose, wearing bad clothes, and unable to talk or do anything. And that just isn't the majority case.
Sally, I want to talk about the future.
Yeah.
Chances are your son will outlive you. you know, as caring a parent as you are, you're not going to be around one day.
Yeah, but chances are my son will live an independent life.
So when you're not here,
When I'm not here, I hope that we will have been able to get Ollie in such a position that he can look after himself.
Sally's not alone in this hope.
Don't be afraid.
Recently, Down syndrome activists in Europe commissioned a TV ad for parents faced with a choice. Do we keep a Down syndrome child or terminate?
Dear future mum.
It's like a plea from the womb, titled Dear Future Mum.
I cried my eyes out for ages, but happy tears, like finally. Young people with Down syndrome advocating for themselves. So you can see that they're happy with their life, they enjoy their life, their parents are involved, their family's involved.
so when you saw that advert, you thought that's it, that's the template for how it really is.
Yeah, it is. It's brilliant. It's amazing.
How does Mateo go to sleep? Yeah.
It focuses on real life, and that's how I see Down syndrome. It's a part of Mateo, but it's a part that enriches all of our lives.
In Australia, doctors are now urging the government to make the $450 NIPT test available free of charge on the medical benefits schedule, which will mean more tests are done and therefore more terminations.
NIPT is a more accurate test. It detects more Down syndrome for fewer invasive tests. It's a better test. We just are responding to the patients who are beating the door down to have the test.
Don't make the mistake that we made here, which is we brought it in without due ethical process. And so now it's, just have a proper ethical consultation.
I love you too. I love you so much.
Sally Phillips wants doctors to learn a fairer way of counselling, to inform their patients with stories like hers, that Down syndrome isn't a burden, and that her son, Ollie, actually enriches her life.
But if you stop thinking of Down syndrome as a disease, then the way you treat mothers is entirely different. You perhaps wouldn't say, I'm sorry, breaking the news with the phrase, I'm sorry. There's nothing to be sorry about. You're lucky, actually.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for talking to us.
So thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
Mom.
Hello, I'm Liam Bartlett. Thanks for watching. To keep up with the latest from 60 Minutes Australia, make sure you subscribe to our channel. You can also download the 9Now app for full episodes and other exclusive 60 Minutes content.